Stensley. Welcome to Chow Time. I have been traveling through the Pacific Northwest, Washington State, and Oregon. And I have been learning all about the pioneers who traveled across the United States to settle in this beautiful land. And I can tell you this, the inspiration for all of this was because of the expedition of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Well, Lawrence, I think I might have a little bit of a challenge for you.
Okay.
I want to create the perfect Lewis and Clark breakfast. So I want to know on their expedition what they ate, what they possibly could have eaten, who they encountered that might have fed them. First of all, Lawrence Cotton, historian, can you give me just a little summary of the facts of the trip, the expedition that Lewis and Clark took across the country?
So basically they left just upriver from the confluence of the Mississippi and the Missouri. They left in the middle of May of 1804, and they arrived here, very near where we are here today, at the mouth, very near the mouth of the Columbia in mid-November 1805, so approximately a year and a half. And then, after wintering over in Fort Clatsop, let's not forget, another 6-month journey home back to St. Louis. So all total, the trip was about 2.5 years. And all along the way, they had their own foodstuffs, certainly to start with, which they had brought on that massive keelboat up the Missouri, as far as what we call Fort Mandan, the Mandan Hidatsa villages. Mm-hmm. They continued to make use of some of those dry goods that they brought with them. And then, from the start, of course, they were hunting. And they were beginning to trade with the natives for a variety of food products, meat, vegetable, and otherwise, all the way along the way. But certainly as they came up and over the Continental Divide and downriver in their dugout canoes, they were out of most of their staples, and then it was much more about hunting and gathering and trading with the natives.
Did they bring eggs or use eggs?
They did gather some bird eggs along the way. They didn't bring any hicks with them, but they did capture some bird eggs along the way. Yeah, wild bird eggs.
Wild bird
I'd have
eggs.
to double check what varieties of birds. Ducks mostly, I believe ducks, and maybe geese, maybe some other waterfowl, unless I'm mistaken.
Did they bring any hooch with them?
They did bring hooch with them. Barrels of hooch.
Oh, wow.
But they ran out even before they reached the Continental Divide. Oh boy.
Oh.
Yeah, barrels of hooch, but they celebrated their second Independence Day on the trail. And danced late into the night and famously drank the last of their distilled spirits.
Well, obviously they encountered friendly Indians along the way. I hope most of them were. Did they
Mostly.
Did they break bread with the Indians?
They did break bread with the Indians, and they broke salmon with the Indians, and camas roots, and wapato plants, and buffalo, and elk, ostensibly, to use the metaphor, and spoiled whale blubber. They shared all of those kinds of ththings with the natives along the way. Buffalo, fundamentally, and deer and other wild game in the plains, and down in this part of the country, from the Nez Perce in particular, they received a lot of sustenance when they came stumbling out of Bitterroots, famished, starving, freezing to death, and they had prior to that, an all-meat buffalo diet, famously upwards of 9 pounds of buffalo meat a day.
Wait, stop.
Yes.
You mean bison, don't you?
Yes, I do mean bison. Same difference.
9 pounds
upwards.
Per person.
Per person. Yep. They needed fuel for the tremendously hard labor that they were doing all day long. Actually, going up the river at that point, they were paddling their you-know-what off to get up the river, and going up and over and around obstacles like the Great Falls of Montana. It took them a month to get around 18 miles of those great falls with all their hardware, so to speak, and all their goods and supplies.
Oh my gosh.
And blazing desert heat at that occasion in the height of the midsummer.
So blazing heat, 9 pounds of bison, buffalo. Boy, I would think that would turn them right into couch potatoes. They'd sit back and watch reruns of The Rifleman.
Yep. We wish. Unfortunately, they didn't have their iPods with them, or iPads. They didn't have their iPads. They weren't listening to music on their iPods either. And they certainly weren't watching the latest releases on Netflix.
Now, what about salmon? I mean,
yes.
Since we've been on the Columbia River, every other word someone is saying salmon this and salmon that. So did they consume a lot of salmon?
And there was a ton of salmon here, and Lewis and Clark saw it right after the height of the harvest of the fall, what would have been the fall Chinook season. Also, there's another species that comes in around that same time, what we now call the silver or coho. And on more than one occasion, they traded with the natives for their somewhat smallish, but apparently muscly little dogs that had some meat on their bones in their camps. And the natives, as far as I understand it, only kept dogs kind of as barely tolerated pets that were getting scraps of food.
Yeah.
And they would only go for them as a culinary item in times of famine. They weren't normally on the native diet, but Lewis and Clark and their men became very fond of dog meat because game was scarce in the mid to lower Columbia. In the midst of a food shortage, Lewis wrote this about a mixture of berries and flour, a prepared dish. 4 of us breakfasted, giving pretty good allowance to the chief, who declared it the best thing he had ever tasted for a long time, and apparently it was the equivalent of a very primitive cobbler.
Lawrence Cotton, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For all your insight. I could talk to you for hours. Oh, I have talked to you for hours.
This is true, we have. Yes.
I appreciate all your knowledge and inspiration for Lewis and Clark breakfast. And I told you I was able to find the perfect guy for this. So my perfect Lewis and Clark breakfast is this. It's salmon hash topped with quail eggs and a bowl of fresh berries. So the very first thing I did was I poached a pound of salmon in hooch water. I had to get that hooch in there, which was nothing more than 1 cup of water and 1 cup of whiskey. Covered it, cooked it in the oven for 20 minutes. So I let it cool down because I'm going to, with my hands, flake it. Just like that. Now, let me wash my hands. Over here, I have 4 large Idaho potatoes that I peeled and diced, along with 1 large onion that I chopped. And I've been cooking these in 1/4 cup of olive oil and 4 tablespoons of butter. And I wanted to cook them slowly. You don't want to overly brown them too soon before everything is tender. That was 20 minutes. I'm going to season them with a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of pepper. Now I add my salmon. Toss it in with the potatoes and onions. Then I'm just going to kind of flatten the top with my spatula. Let that cook a little bit so the salmon can warm up, and plus it's always nice to have a little bit of a brown, crusty bottom. So now you can turn your heat up to medium-high. And while that's cooking, I'm going to cook up some quail eggs. So I have a couple of tablespoons of butter melting in a pan. And because quail eggs, and you can see I broke a couple, but because they cook so quickly because they're so small, you don't want to break them into the pan. You want to break them into a dish and then put them in the pan when the butter starts sizzling. So I slide all my eggs into an appropriate sized pan. My eggs are done. I season them with a little salt and pepper. Then all I'm going to do is slide them right from the pan on top of that salmon hash. Oh, and there's one more thing. Instead of having bacon on the side, you have to have bison jerky. Or is it buffalo jerky? They ate a lot of this, and it's very good. So I'm going to take a little bite of this salmon hash with my quail eggs. It's delicious. Oh, I can tell you I've never had salmon hash for breakfast before. So here's to Lewis and Clark for paving the way, going through such treacherous passages and rivers and mountains, and for our pioneers to cross our country and settled in the beautiful American West. Here's also to Lawrence Cotton, once again for your inspiration and your fascinating conversation. You put this whole breakfast right in my mind.